in my opinion, is the best evidence. So far, we might be looking at a four-sided pyramid yet. That's geometry and symmetry is just way beyond anything else I've seen on Mars.
Welcome to the continuing series of the award-winning Mars documentary titled Blue Planet Red. There's more to Mars than you might think. Water, life, pyramids, UFOs, cataclysm. Watch the film online at blueplanetred.net. Today I'm speaking with Jean Ward, a web developer, graphic designer, imaging specialist, and independent Mars researcher from Pretoria, South Africa. Mr. Ward earned 2 academic degrees in telecommunications and electronic commerce, and currently works as an information technology specialist at Telkom, South Africa's leading telecommunications company. The majority of his Mars research involves sifting through thousands of orbiter photographs published on NASA's website. Some of his discoveries have been featured on the History Channel's The Unexplained with William Shatner. Mr. Ward joins me remotely for this interview, where today we'll highlight some of his most remarkable discoveries.
When I talk to people about Mars, I will mention on occasion that I know a few individuals around the world who spend a lot of time sifting through images, sifting through NASA images, sifting through images from European Space Agency, and you're one of those guys, and you're way down there in South Africa. I didn't know South Africans were interested in Mars.
I think if I was in the States, I'd be a lot more visible. These things would be a lot more well known. But I want to do my country justice, and hence the YouTube channel. I want to share with people what I found, and I'm absolutely delighted that I have the subscriber base that I do. I've got something like 8,000 subscribers now, and I feel it's an honor for me to present these anomalies as a South African, because I believe South Africa doesn't get the type of exposure it used to in the old days. A lot of things have changed. A lot of politics has happened in the country. We're in junk status. As far as I know, we're still in junk status. That's below a recession. But we make ends meet. We continue doing our bit, and I hope that your audience also finds these anomalies and discoveries interesting. And I believe at the end of the day, this is a database of potential sites that we can go visit one day. I believe we should get boots on the ground. They must go to these sites, and we need to check these things out. What I'm doing is I find these things, I present them as nuts and bolts to my audience, and then I leave it up to them to decide what it is that they're looking at. Once in a while, I'll make a comment like, I speculate this might be whatever, but I'll always end it by saying, but let me know what you think. And basically, we'll be going through these things that I've found, and hopefully your audience can resonate with the geometry and symmetry of these objects. Carl Sagan once said, if you're looking for intelligent life, this is paraphrasing it, look for symmetry and geometry in structures and anomalies. And I think the evidence I'll present here speaks to that. So yeah, thank you for having me on, Brian. You're doing an outstanding job, and I've watched your documentary Blue Planet Red. Outstanding piece of work. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Well, thank you. You're one of these guys, as I just said, who just goes through all these hundreds, maybe even thousands of NASA photographs, and there's a few of you out there across the world. But my question to you first off is, why are you doing this? Why are you going through image? I mean, NASA takes these pictures, they post them on the internet. Isn't the work done?
This is a very good question. I'm glad you brought this up, Brian. What we found was that they present the photographs as they're taken, but they'll focus on, say for example, the geology of the site that was photographed, but they won't delve into any of the artifacts. Myself and some other researchers believe it might be as a result of that finding of the Brookings report that was compiled in the 50s. Broadly speaking, they say that the human society as it is not ready for this type of disclosure. And disclosing any of this information will basically have people in riots, and they'll start questioning their religion. They're going to question a whole lot of things, and the Brookings report speaks to that. I believe that NASA might still be bound by the findings of that report. But I could be totally wrong. It could also be soft disclosure, drip disclosure. They present the evidence and then basically leave it up to us, researchers like ourselves, to do the disclosing. Because you must also remember, a lot of these people are highly paid professionals, and I think they might be reluctant to speak about it because of being rejected by their peers. There's peer pressure. So I just do this, and hopefully one day they'll actually be honest and say, listen, we found this, we found that. Ellen Stofan, one of the chief scientists over at NASA, also speaks to, they will be disclosing life, or the discovery of life on Mars within the next couple of years. I'm also paraphrasing there. So I don't think they're intentionally withholding information. I just think they're leaving it up to us to do the sort of disclosure on their behalf because of kickback. I'm not sure.
You tell me if this syncs up with how you understand things. NASA is legally obligated to publish these photos, but they don't necessarily need to make a big deal about these photos. They might say, oh, well, this is just a landscape of some hills, but they don't examine each specific thing because if it's outside geology, then they really don't want to add any commentary to it.
You're absolutely correct. That's exactly what they do. For most photographs, the rover photographs and the orbiter photographs, you'll find here and there an article or a blog that was written by them, but then they don't really say, look, this is what we speculate we found here. Like you say, they would rather talk about the geology. They will say, sure, we found something that looks like a type of a shape, but they'll never actually speculate. That's the other problem I find with these mainstream scientists, is that they don't speculate anymore because of fear of retaliation, fear from peer pressure, and potentially career limiting statements. I know a lot of these top guys get grants, and I think they might be afraid that their grants are taken away when they delve into speculation. And unfortunately, we find that with a lot of science now, not even just space science, or you find it in mainstream science in general. The scientists are afraid to speculate, and it's unfortunately the sign of the times you live in, with all the shadow banning going on, being censored on social media. I'm sure your viewers are very up to date on all the censorship that's going on around the world. I think that's what's happening here as well, Brian.
without being specific, okay, because we're going to get into these images in a minute, but just generally speaking, you know, why, what do you see in general when you're going through all of these images?
Right, what I look for is symmetry and geometry. I'm so used to scanning through all these thousands and thousands of photographs that my eye is trained that something with geometry and symmetry to it will immediately stand out. I find that when someone that doesn't do this type of research looks at the photographs, they just see boulders and they don't see anything that sticks out like a sore finger. But then when you zoom in using software provided by NASA, you can download it. It's a JP2 image viewer. Their photographs are taken in ultra high resolution, the Mars Reconnaissance high-rise orbiter photographs. You can actually zoom in to like 25 centimeters per pixel. But yeah, these things stick out. The geometry and the symmetry, I would say, Brian.
How can you reassure people that what you're doing down in South Africa is not manipulating these images to create something that's false, leading us to believe that there's something on Mars that really doesn't exist? What's your process like?
For those of you that might follow me on my blog or over on my YouTube channel, you'll see I always do an introduction, then I show the audience the original source material. I give them a link to where they can actually go and download the photograph for themselves, and they can check. They can actually go through the photograph and check that, yeah, the item or items are actually there. And you'll see I always give the source. A lot of YouTube channels unfortunately don't do that, and that's to our detriment. The guys that are trying to do this honestly, it makes it very difficult for us. You get these clickbait channels that will show you something that's fake, and then they won't include a link for you to actually go and check, yeah, that item or object is actually there. So that, I think that in itself might reassure the people viewing the objects, the fact that I give the original source material, that they can actually go in and check for themselves.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a bit of image upscaling or processing that you have to do to clean up some of these images? What's that like?
Yes. In the past, I used PhotoZoom Pro 7 to upscale images. And if you're into graphic designing like I am, that's what I do for a living. I'm a graphic designer and web developer. When you use PhotoZoom Pro or upscaling software, Photoshop, you get pixelation, or the image becomes incredibly blurry. So what I'm doing lately is I'm using AI-assisted image upscaling software. But you got to be very careful with it. There are luckily parameters, sliders that you can adjust to ensure that you're not introducing something that is not there. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to click between what would it look like without the artificial intelligence upscaling factor, and what does it look like when you're upscaling it. So you've got to do the adjustments. You've got to be very careful. Like I say, if you overcompensate, the AI introduces things that aren't really there. So you've got to make sure, yeah, look, that part of the object is in, it's got a shadow on it, or this part is highlighted. Then when you go over to the AI-assisted upscaler, you've got to check, okay, yeah, you got to flip between the two to see what is being sharpened. Basically, I use Topaz Gigapixel AI to upscale my images. You've got to check that the source and the upscaled versions are very, very similar. You've got to make sure that you're not getting weird artifacting. So that's how I do it, Brian.
You have a very meticulous process that you you abide by to make sure that you're not introducing anything that's really not part of the picture or misleading.
That's absolutely correct. I try and use the software as conservatively as possible, just to sharpen it. I use it to sharpen it. And another problem, Brian, I'm glad you also mentioned this, is many of the photographs that NASA releases to the public are whitewashed. What I mean by that is they're very bright, they've removed the contrast. So what we've got to do as researchers often is reduce the brightness and add a bit of contrast. So we don't physically manipulate the photographs. We don't use a dodge and burn tool, for example, to make something appear that isn't there. What you'll do is you'll adjust the brightness and contrast just so it looks natural. I think it's also a tactic, maybe, by the agencies to hide something, to make it difficult to see. If you're going through these images, oh, this one's too bright, you can't see any detail in it. But if you go in and adjust these things start popping out. As soon as you start seeing the shadows and the definitions, you make things out that you won't ordinarily see if you're just looking at the original. So yeah, you got to be very careful when you upscaling these objects, Brian.
We have our first image up on screen here. When you first saw this, what did you think?
Down to the bottom left, there's symmetry and geometry going on there. And I saw a pyramid. And I speculate we're looking at a four-sided pyramid there. And it's huge. This thing is huge, Brian. It measures about 2.5 by 2.5 kilometers in length at the base. And then you'll also notice the apex is flat. Just like that giant pyramid in Cairo, where it looks like a capstone was removed. It sort of looks similar here. But then there's another aspect to this which makes it look more like a pyramid that you'd find in South America, with the ramp. It's got like a ramp part coming out on the bottom left, right in its center. And also I speculate this thing was underwater for an extended period of time. It's covered in sediment. You can't really make out the details of it because it's covered in old mud or old sediment. And you'll also see at the base there was water in this area too. Like this thing could have been standing in a swamp. If you look at the erosion pattern there on the outer edge. So yeah, I compare this to the pyramid in Teotihuacan with that ramp coming off the side. So we've got a mixture here of potentially that Egyptian type pyramid style with the South American Mayan or Incan type pyramid with a ramp. It's very, very strange. But yeah, the symmetry and geometry of this pyramid, which incidentally so far, in my opinion, is the best evidence of a pyramid found on Mars. There is another one in Sardinia where there's the face. I think that's more of a five-sided pyramid, but it's very highly eroded. But I think with this one you can be relatively safe in assuming you might be looking at a four-sided pyramid. Yeah, that's geometry and symmetry is just way beyond anything else I've seen on Mars.
What would it mean if, in fact, what we're looking at here is actually a pyramid? What would that mean to you?
Well, there are many that speculate Mars was a thriving planet in the distant past with water and plants and an atmosphere. It would make sense that there's an ancient civilization, potentially totally extinct right now or underground, we don't know. But it would tell me that there's definitely signs of an ancient civilization, a megalithic type of civilization that thrived on Mars in the distant past. Dr. John Brandenburg, many people might be familiar with his work, has added this pyramid to his list of his hypothesis of an ancient civilization on Mars. So he found it intriguing enough to add to his hypothesis. And then George Haas from the Sardinia Institute, the founder of the Sardinia Institute, wrote a journal or two about this pyramid as well. And these papers have been peer-reviewed. And many of the reviewers say, yes, this is potentially a pyramid of artificial origin.
So if that were true, and there's no longer a civilization on Mars, but there once was, how does that conjure up any feelings for you?
It does. The planet was totally devastated. I've looked at so many different sites in the northern mid-latitudes and the southern mid-latitudes, and you see it. The surface was totally devastated. It could have been multiple catastrophes that destroyed these megalithic structures on Mars. That's what I call them, megalithic structures, because I find so many blocks, megalithic blocks, very similar to those that we find here on Earth, that have been spread out all over the surface. So we can only speculate as to what happened there, Brian. But yeah, all I can say is it's a warning to us here on Earth that something similar like this could happen to us. And yes, humanity or the Earth has gone through a couple of catastrophes or natural catastrophes in the past. And if we're not careful, we could inevitably end up destroying ourselves with all these nuclear weapons and things we have now. So Mars, I look at it as a warning.
What I'm so excited about with regard to your work and your discoveries, Jean, is the sheer variety of structures that you've been able to find. And we put together the list of the more or less top 10 here because they're all so very different from one another. And if I'm to interpret your inspiration for this work, they all defy explanation. They all defy conventional geological explanation. Now, certainly you and I aren't geologists. We're not scientists, but we've seen enough images of the Earth and mountain ranges and things of that nature to simply ask ourselves, what's going on here? And I suspect that you, me, and a lot of other people are wondering why our institutions, NASA, European Space Agency, are not asking these questions themselves and looking further into these structures.
Yeah, Brian, I think they are. Every country that has the ability to launch probes or rockets out towards Mars is rushing to get there at the moment. We've got China there, India, we've got the Americans, the Europeans. Elon Musk from SpaceX wants to get there ASAP and populate the planet. I think there's an ancient history that's being withheld from us. Even here on Earth, there's ancient secret knowledge that's being withheld from us. I speculate, are after artifacts and technology on Mars. And they know what's there, but they're not saying it. There's a saying, the ultimate power is in secrecy, or a secret or secret knowledge is a very powerful thing. And that thing there is very interesting. If you do a close-up on it, you'll see it's got straight grooves on it, parallel grooves there in the shade. It's 6.5 kilometers long by 500 meters wide. And interestingly, the page where I downloaded this from, the NASA site, their caption for it says, "Interesting feature on northern plains." They make a bland statement like that. But I mean, I found it interesting enough to make that comment. So it's intriguing.
I call this the line, maybe you call it a line too, but this is not unlike many other lines that I've seen in photographs. I got a buddy of mine, I don't know if you've met him yet, but his name is Leggiere. He's in Colorado, and he does a lot of these, the same kind of work that you do, and he's found remarkable images, just like you have, and including a series of lines. And what I've noticed with these lines is that quite often there's a little crater right next to it. And I don't see any signs of damage to the structure. And you would think if there's an impact, it might have damaged the structure a little bit, but I see this multiple times. And here's yet another example. So have you had anyone explain to you what this could possibly be?
No. That long straight line, to me, that looks like a structure that's partially covered in sand.
Right, but what would be miles long, straight, smooth? It's not a mountain range. This is protruding out from the surface of the planet. This is not carved out. So what the heck is going on here?
I don't know, Brian.
All right, let's go to the next image here. So here's a typical orbiter image that you'll come across in your daily routine of just searching through new images, and you say, okay, well, here's the next one on the list. Let's open this up and let's just start looking. And at first glance, this just seems like a boring orbiter image.
Well, if you look at the circular depressions, they've all got the same sort of appearance, right?
Like the craters.
But right there in the center, it's not a depression. It doesn't look like any of the circular depressions in that photograph. It's like a hole. You can see, wait a bit, something's different with this one. And then if you zoom in on it, you'll see it's about 30 meters long. But it's got like bracing. It's got like supporting beams or bracing. And it looks like a sinuous type of material as well. And it's hollow. It looks like it's hollow. I don't know what it is, but it looks artificial in nature because of it looks like supporting beams or structures or pipes on the bottom left.
This doesn't look like a crater. This doesn't look like a mountain. It doesn't look like a volcano. It doesn't look like a lake. It almost, maybe it's like a spider web. There's just a few different variety of ways you could describe something like this. But you're right. This doesn't look like any of the surrounding craters.
No, and there's also an interesting, it's sort of like bent. There's a bent piece up towards the north. I don't know what that is either. It looks like, like a worm. I don't know. It's a hell of an interesting anomaly, and it's 30 meters wide, so you can imagine it's, you can go in there. It's big. It's huge.
We should probably go take a closer look at this one. What do you think?
Tell Elon we want to go. We want to go check these things out.
Okay, so here's the next image. Another boring orbiter photo.
Correct. But note the item in the center. There's symmetry and geometry. There's a rectangular outline there. And if you zoom in on it, you can see it looks like the outline of a structure, of a wall, with this strange circular semi-structure in the middle. And this reminds me of the ancient structure at Chanquillo, the coastal desert of Peru. There's a similar walled structure there. And it's also got those circular, smaller structures on the inside. And that measures about 30 meters in size. Note the symmetry to the outer wall with the rounded corners. Obviously, because it's covered in sand on the one side, we can't say for sure what that is.
Yes. So you've likened this to the ancient monumental complex of Chanquillo, which is located in Peru, which I think is a great comparison. Were you already familiar with that site, or how did you put two and two together there to have something to compare it to on Earth?
Brian, I'd say half of 50% of the anomalies that I've found on Mars so far, I'm familiar with something similar to it here on Earth. But with this one, no. I wasn't aware of Chanquillo. It was when I was preparing for this interview that I went into a little more research and digging, and that's when I found this strange structure here on Earth. So thanks to this interview, I found something similar, an analog to something here on Earth.
See, that's what I find so amazing is, we have all these experts who are familiar with these ancient sites. We have these images coming in from NASA, which show things that are similar to these ancient sites that we have here on Earth. But we leave it to the one guy in South Africa to put two and two together here?
Unfortunately, Brian, that's true. I don't know many other researchers that actually research Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, or ESA, Mars photographs. But I have approached numerous mainstream science geologists here on Earth and said to them, listen, take a look at this. It looks similar to this here on Earth. This is on Mars. But I get crickets. It's silence. I think, like I said in the beginning, I think these guys are afraid of retaliation, the peer pressure of losing their grants. But yeah, they're allowing me to do this. Although my channel and my blog is slightly shadow banned, they do release these things, and I don't get censored. However, I was censored on Facebook when I was posting my finds there. And I had the opportunity to dispute the censorship, but I decided, you know what, if you guys want to do that, I wasn't breaking any community guidelines or whatever. I'm just deleting my profile. But yeah, on YouTube, you can go and you can check these things out for yourselves. And regrettably, I am one of the very, very few that talk about these anomalies in orbiter photographs.
Well, I just want to extend my thanks for doing so, because somebody has to, and if NASA's not going to do it, well, then that just leaves people like you and Gary and, my friend Michael, who produced the film with me, and Rami Bar-Alan, and so many others.
I can mention that Joe from Art Alien TV, that's his YouTube channel, once in a while also delves into these types of photographs, orbiter photographs, but the majority of independent Mars researchers predominantly only focus on rover photographs.
I've had a similar experience when speaking with professionals, when you'll show them an image, ask them what they think, and they'll tell you it looks like, for instance, a fossil or maybe, a structure, a pyramid, or whatever, and then you'll say, well, it's on Mars. And then it's like, uh-oh, well, no, I really didn't mean that. Let me take that back, because that can't possibly be, because it's on Mars. And I think that's, I can't blame them necessarily, because to acknowledge something like that can be frightening, because that changes the entire way we look at this planet. It's just not this dead rock anymore. It may very well have been like Earth, and if it was like Earth in the past, it could have had life, perhaps even intelligent life, who built structures who were no longer there. And, us humans, especially us Americans, we're pretty daggum arrogant about things, and, there's nothing better. This is the pinnacle of creation. Mars, they couldn't have done it first. And that's, I think what scares people. But in spite of all that, you guys are still out there sifting through these images, finding some really compelling stuff. And I think what I'm trying to do is highlight this work, because you're doing very important work that, in my opinion, is world class. And I think more people need to see what you're doing, because the more people we get to take these images seriously, to have a serious conversation about that, we could end up changing the entire narrative for this whole planet.
Thank you, Brian. I do appreciate that compliment. I think also, the universities and the colleges, they also have a narrative. They've got a dogma to what they teach. They've got a certain way of seeing things. It's been like that forever. So for someone, an academic that has this background, it's also probably, no, it can't be. Oh, I don't know about that. I was never taught that. It can't be. Maybe it's that as well. I don't know. But thank you very much for the compliment, Brian.
Let's move on to the next image. Again, John, we have just another boring orbiter photograph here. It just looks like a bunch of rocks. What's the big deal?
This JP2, this is a crop from a huge photograph.
Okay, what's a JP2? What are you talking about?
A JP2 is a format of JPEG. It's a JPEG 2000 specification, which means the JPEG images are huge for an image. So you can imagine going through just one high-rise photograph takes at least 4 hours, panning through it, up and down, left and right, until you find these things. Actually, in this photograph, I found megalithic blocks with those protrusions or knobs on them. But then, when I was upscaling the images, I noticed, but wait a bit, there's like a long rectangular cigar-shaped object there. And I took a closer look, and it's not like any of the boulders or rocks or stones around the area, not even like the rectangular megalithic blocks that I found there, but this thing looks like some type of craft. It looks like, you could say, a little boat or even a submarine. I know that sounds ridiculous, but look at the parts to it. It's 15 meters long. So you can hop onto that thing and then walk from the one side to the other. You can walk across it. It's huge as well. And then it's got that circular hole. It looks like a hatch thing there in the center. And then that grid-like part to the bottom left. And then it's also got, like, at the back, like a little platform. I don't know what to make of it. It was one of my YouTube subscribers who actually said, "But hang on, that looks like a submarine." I don't know, Brian. We are just seeing these things, and reporting on them. We need to go there. We need to touch these things and walk on them and analyze them. And, well, what else did I want to say about it? It's in a region of Mars called Noachis Terra. And Noachis Terra roughly translates to land of Noah, or Noah's land. That's a very interesting name for it, because in the whole of this Noachis Terra, I've been finding evidence of what I think look like capsized boats. Seeing the keels, the rest is like covered in sand. Other Mars researchers in rover photographs have also found objects that look like capsized boats. Now, could it be that the Martians were actually a seafaring nation or a civilization? And are we seeing remnants of it? Yeah. As I say, this is only one example of what could potentially be some type of seafaring craft. Or could it be an outpost? Could it be a building? I don't know, Brian.
Well, and I think that's the question, is that if we can at least be honest to say that we don't know what this is, but it clearly looks different than the surrounding landscape, shouldn't the question then be, well, NASA, can you please go take a closer look at this and tell us what this is? Go tell us that this isn't what it looks like, which is something weird.
This is another interesting part to this science. Apparently, they land their craft in very boring, mundane regions of Mars, where there's lots of sand, very little boulders, very little to look at, because apparently when the rovers and the craft land, they don't want them to topple over. They don't want them to land on the side of a boulder or a rock and then topple over. So I doubt we'll ever see rovers or drones close to these sites, because they are covered in boulders and rocks and huge megalithic blocks. So if we are going to go and check these things out, hopefully they can provide us with high resolution orbiter photographs, or we need to get humans down there to traverse the terrain and then eventually end up and go and have a look at these things. But I can't foresee, in my opinion, them ever landing rovers or drones near these sites. So it remains a mystery. Let's see what the future brings, Brian. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think we're being prepared for some type of disclosure soon. But that's only speculation.
I think that's at least partially because of the work of people like you. Because, like we were talking about before, NASA has to publish these images, but they don't have to make a big deal about it, which gives us free rein to make a big deal about it. And so therefore they can shift the responsibility, any accountability of association with something that might be considered fringe off to the guy in South Africa. Who's going to take that guy seriously? He's in South Africa.
I think you could call it plausible deniability, right?
So let's move on to the next image. Broken record here, another boring image. Why bother taking a close? Okay, look, we got a valley. Okay, we got a valley. So what?
Okay, if you look closely in that valley, you see two parallel lines and then two arced lines. If you look at the origin points of those two parallel lines and the arcs, they're basically at two sides, right? So if something's rolled down, okay, I can expect the two parallel lines. But then why, from the same origin points, do we have those arcs with two similar sized and shaped objects at the end of those two arced tracks? So something very odd is going on there. And not having all the data available to me, I can't say what it is, but something out of the ordinary is going on there. I don't know if you agree.
Let me ask you this. What if someone were to say, that just looks like a stitching artifact where two images have been put together and stitched together?
Okay, these stitching artifacts you do find in Mars orbiter photographs, but the lines are always basically vertical. I've never seen a stitching line that runs across like that, and also it doesn't extend all the way through the photograph. It's only in that valley, and you'll see it comes to an abrupt end even before the side of this hill on the left. It's not I don't think it's a stitching artifact. It looks like something rolled down there. You can even see the impressions it made as it was rolling down. But then the two arcs, if it's a stitching artifact, sure, but then what about those two similar arcs, those tracks?
Okay, so we have these arcs here, which look like they end in these little black dots. Okay, are we to interpret these black dots as, at the very least, a couple of boulders?
Rolling boulders, I've seen in other photographs where NASA actually says, okay, yeah, is a track left by a rolling boulder. They look similar to those parallel lines. Never have I seen a solid line like that from a rolling boulder. That looks like a track to me, made by, I'm not sure. I don't know. We need to get better photographs of this.
So what about this? What could it possibly be two boulders that started here and then they went across the valley together and then they went back maybe a couple of times and then they both decided they wanted to roll down at a particular curve simultaneously, like synchronized? Isn't that possible? Don't rocks do that?
Well, you do get rocks that move in these flat salt plains, I think. You get those moving boulders and rocks. But I don't think you'll ever get two that decide to do these things simultaneously together in a synchronized fashion. But you do get moving boulders and rocks here on Earth. I just can't remember the site's name, but they do tend to move, which is rather odd.
This next image that we're going to get to was most famously pointed out by astronaut Buzz Aldrin.
We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours.
And indeed, there is one. And it's located right at the top.
This big rock here that we're seeing right here, this is the moon of Mars.
Yes, Phobos.
Phobos. Okay. Well, it doesn't look special to me. It just looks like a big rock.
And it's basically featureless. If you analyze this photograph, you won't find anything of special interest on the surface, except for that little spot right there at the top.
Yeah, you've highlighted something. It looks like you've highlighted something. You've got this rectangle around this little white speck of something. Why are we making such a big deal about this one? It's a little speck, so what?
Okay, if you zoom in, it's actually a rectangular object, which is 20 meters wide.
Now how can you tell it's a rectangular object?
I can see the 90-degree angles to it, and the shadow it's making into that depression says to me that there is a block. I simulated this in Adobe Dimension. I built a 3D model and I placed this block in there, and I looked at the elevation of the sun, the angle that NASA indicates for that photograph, and I popped it into the simulated world, and it made the same shadow. So it confirms to me that it is actually a block. And why would Buzz Aldrin say something like that? He has his reputation on the line. He was a famous Apollo 11 astronaut.
It's certainly odd that it's a dramatically different color, and there's nothing else like it in the surrounding landscape, and it just sort of, it just looks like it's sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yes, there's nothing else, as you say, like it in the entire photograph. It's the only one of its kind.
Well, has NASA made any plans to go take a closer look at this?
I don't know. Look, as far as I know, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed this with the high-rise camera. Maybe in the future they can get closer to it, but I haven't seen any higher definition photographs of this item.
Well, certainly Buzz Aldrin thought it was a big deal to talk about, so maybe we should take a closer look.
I think so as well. It would be very intriguing to actually excavate that thing.
Before we get to this next series of images, I want to just prepare the viewers here. Okay, we're going into some different territory right now, okay? Believe me, I understand the skepticism, all right? Next image. Well,
okay, this is from a series of photographs taken by the rover Curiosity. And what makes these stand out for me is the fact that these weren't taken by the stereo camera, so we don't have a left and a right to compare to see whether this was a speck of dust or a cosmic ray burst on the sensor in the camera. So we got one-off of each of these.
What are we looking at here? We see a boring rover landscape photo. We've seen thousands of these. Big deal.
Right, but have a look at that speck.
Okay, so if we zoom in,
it's got a structure to it, but it's not huge. I would say that object there is about 20 meters across, but it's difficult to say. We don't have stereoscopic two images to compare to get depth. But an ultra close-up of that thing reveals it's got symmetry and geometry to it. It looks like it's a disc with a dome. That's so weird, Brian.
let's examine what a conventional explanation could be. Okay, someone might say this is just dust on the lens, and I would say, as someone who is somewhat familiar with cameras, that if you have dust on the lens, you don't see it. It might make it a little blurry, but you don't see a crisply outlined, detailed.
NASA's explanation for these strange artifacts on the camera is it's dust. It's a dust particle, or it's a cosmic ray burst. It's a discharge on the CCD sensor on the lens in the camera. But why is it so clearly defined? You can see the outline of it. It's got a shape to it.
Yeah, it is clearly defined. It's not in the shape of a pixel. It's not in the shape of, a 2 to 3, even 4 pixels that are just. See, that's another conventional explanation. They'll say it's a dead pixel or a stuck pixel. But first of all, a pixel will be much smaller than this. And why does this have such a peculiar shape to it? Dust would not show up on a camera like this. You can't photograph dust unless not from a rover camera. You could photograph it with a microscope or really high up, if you're zooming in looking at a tabletop, but dust would not render like this. A stuck pixel would not render like this. So the only explanation is this must just be one of those flying rocks that they have on Mars.
You know, interesting, if you look at the photograph just before this and the photograph just after this, there's a couple of seconds between the sequence of photographs. So this thing, it must have zoomed past if it's a flying object, or the wind blew whatever it was off the camera. But as you say, it's in focus. So I don't know if it was on the camera.
Let's go to the next photo. Another boring rover landscape photo, big deal.
NASA actually speculate that there is a discharge on the sensor in the camera. But also a close-up of it reveals it's got some structure to it, some type of shape. Again, it's like this oblong piece with little domes on it. They don't necessarily always mention this is what it looks like. But this artifact you're seeing there was caused by some type of discharge on the detector on the camera. They just release these photographs. I mean, so we can speculate about what these things are. It's just, these are aerial phenomena. They're off the surface. They seem to be airborne. And they've got some shape to them, which doesn't make it look like a random occurrence. It looks like something structured that was there.
Let's go to the next image. Here we have another rover landscape photo, but it's obvious that there's something dark up there in the sky. So as a curious individual, I might say to myself, well, let's take a closer look and let's zoom in on that. What do we see here?
And then off to the left, a bit further to the background there, it looks like there's another one.
It does. There's something else back there too.
I don't know what to make of these things, Brian. Is it just dust, wind, blowing something across the surface? I don't know. With the lack of data in these photographs and the explanation from NASA's side, or lack of it, we can only speculate.
Another rover photograph here. Obviously, there's something in the sky that doesn't look like it belongs.
And this is one of two that look very similar.
So if we take a closer look at this one, what's your analysis of this?
To me, it looks like a side view, something that's just moving very fast, and it's smeared on the right. I don't know, but there's another one like it, which makes this very anomalous.
So if we go to the next photograph, wide angle, like how do you even spot this stuff? I mean, I'm just looking at this and I'm like, okay, you know, wide angle rover photograph, boring, next. But then you'll say, no, I'm going to take a closer look at this, because you'll zoom in on an area. Now here, okay, you'll zoom in on an area, and I assume we're going to be talking about this thing off in the distance, but I see these white specks all over the place, right? To me, these white specks look like dead pixels to me.
Yes, that is typically what I would say a cosmic ray burst would do on the sensor of the camera. I don't know if you agree with me, but those detectors are prone to do that type of thing when they get a discharge of electricity. And those are totally random. But that thing there in the background is not the bright discharge of light.
Right. If it were a camera artifact, if it were some type of electrical discharge malfunction that produced one of these dead pixels, it would produce a series of these. I mean, we saw these even going back to Viking images where they call them dropouts or pixel dropouts or something like that. I mean, that's what this looks like to me. And You know, as you would know from being a technologist, you remember those, you know, older technology, the DLP projectors, even LCD projectors, or even plasma TVs. You know, if once the TV gets really old, you start to see a lot of these dead pixels start showing up more and more, and then there's no way to fix that. And it is sort of a random array, a spattering of them as it appears here in this photograph, and they get stuck. And the reason why you see them is because they get stuck in a pixel that is distinctly different from the surrounding image. And that's why we see all these here. But clearly that thing there hovering above that hill is not one of these imaging artifacts. That's something that the camera photographed. It's not a piece of dust. A piece of dust would not be in focus at that distance. And it's not an imaging artifact. So what the heck is it?
I don't know. It's very similar to the one just before this. It's also got like a point to it, and then this blurry, larger shape to the other opposite side. And yeah, if it was like a dead pixel or dead pixels, you'll see it in other photographs too. But that isn't the case. So it was there, and then a moment later, when it was photographed again, it wasn't there.
Let's move on to the next image. We have here an interesting trail. Looks like a trail of some sort. This is an orbiter photograph. What caught your eye about this?
Right, the trench and the semicircular ridged artifact to the left. It looks like something impacted the surface at a very low trajectory or angle, and then scraped a trench, and then came to a standstill to the left. A close-up will show you it actually looks like a disc, but it's slightly bent. But it is very symmetrical. If you take a drawing tool, a graphic illustrator package, for example, and you draw a circle, that thing is exactly on that circle. So it's got a very well-defined symmetry and geometry to it. It's about 9 meters wide, and it seems to be tilted up slightly, and the shadow length, and given the sun's elevation angle on this photograph, that is about 2 meters up. So you can go stand next to that thing and it will be huge.
Jean, are you suggesting that it's possible that one of these things that we saw in the previous photographs that were in the sky, perhaps even flying around, maybe crashed down onto the surface?
I speculate so. This photograph was featured in a documentary on the History Channel, and they interviewed a skeptic and a conspiracy theorist. The skeptic is an employee of NASA, and it's a scientist, and he says he can't say for sure whether that's a dune or whether that's a disk. So even NASA can't say for sure that that is a dune. If you look at the zoomed out view, the dunes are all perpendicular to that trench. But that there, it's got like an arc to it. Some reckon it's a dune, and because of the round shape of the edge of that trench, the wind, when it blows across there, makes that round dune. But I don't think so. I think it's something that crashed there. Could it be something from a mission that NASA or the ESA conducted that crashed there? Could it be extraterrestrial in nature? We don't know, Brian.
It almost looks like it gets deeper as it goes along there. That the trench just...
Yes, yes, like it came in at a very low angle.
Yeah.
and started decelerating and flying up more and more because of its momentum. It got deeper and deeper and left that trench.
So, NASA, if this is not what it looks like, a flying saucer that crashed on Mars, can you please send somebody there to take better photographs of this so we can just put this to rest, please? Because this is driving people like Jean and I crazy trying to figure out what this is. Good find. This is exciting.
Thank you.
Any last words? Why don't you tell us about your experience going through these images, what inspires you, and what you'd like to see happen?
Carl Sagan once, roughly speaking, said if you're looking for signs of intelligent life
on Earth first reveals itself through the geometric regularity of its constructions.
this that we've covered now, plus all the other evidence that I've gathered over this approximately 7 years that I've been doing this, points to this symmetry and geometry that keeps recurring throughout sites on Mars. In my point of view, I hypothesize we're looking at remnants of an ancient civilization that once thrived on Mars. I mean, if you look at the amount of structures or devastation of these structures at different sites, in my opinion, I'd say there was a thriving civilization on Mars. And then due to a catastrophe, multiple catastrophes, everything was destroyed. What I would like is for us to put boots on the ground and go to these sites physically and go and touch these things and analyze them and be forthright and transparent about what we're finding there. Don't be scared to say, no, man, it's just natural. Or don't be afraid of saying, no, this is definitely something unnatural. Don't be bound by this thing that is withholding mainstream science and media from talking about these things. Be honest, but get to these things. Let's find out what they are. That is my deepest desire at this point in time, Brian.
Well said, John. Thank you very much for your time. Keep doing what you're doing. We really appreciate all your work. And I hope that more people see it. And I'm going to do my part to make sure that this work does not go unnoticed.
What you're doing is just as important. And as a small community, we can support one another, and hopefully this message gets out to more people, because everyone, let's face it, is busy with their families. They don't have time. They've got work. They've got pressure from outside. They don't have the time to actually go in and do all this research. So I believe what we've done here is we've found all these nuts and bolts. We're presenting it in a manner in which you don't need like a degree, or you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out these things. So I believe that your work, my work, and all the other independent researchers are building a huge puzzle. We're finding the pieces, and eventually, hopefully, the puzzle will fall in place and we'll see the bigger picture. Thanks for the interview, Brian. Really appreciate this opportunity.
This is the continuing series of Blue Planet Red, an award-winning documentary film on the history, evidence for life, and catastrophes that contributed to the death of Mars. The documentary includes interviews with NASA's lead astrobiologist, university professors, aerospace industry scientists, and independent researchers. If Mars was like Earth in the distant past, could there still be life there now? What happened to it? And what turned a blue planet red?